Recognizes Mr. Braley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stearns, there's a great episode on the TV show The Office where one of the characters engages in a low-speed chase with the Prius and sneaks up on one of the other characters, which demonstrates the importance of this legislation. Mr. McCurdy, voluntary can be a relative thing. And you talked earlier about some of the voluntary changes the industry had made to respond to safety concerns, but a lot of those changes that were made were also things that the industry initially resisted. And one of the great things about the country we live in is we have a system that allows people from all different walks of life to work together both in a public setting like through NHTSA and through our private enforcement methods to try to hold people accountable and work together to improve the technology in automobiles. You mentioned that you had concerns about the use of electronic data recorder information and suggested it could lead to more litigation. I would challenge that statement because I believe if you had a system with standards for accessing and downloading that information and a clear understanding of what it represented, you could actually reduce litigation. Because right now, much of the expense in a lot of these crashworthiness cases is people trying to understand how an accident occurred, how the occupant compartment was compromised and potentially contributed to the fatality or the severity of the crash. So one of the things that I'm interested in hearing from you is we've been talking about the standards for electronic data recorders, and there's already been some proposals, both by the Institute for Electrical Engineers and also proposed regulations that NHTSA is considering. And it's been my impression that some members of your alliance have been objecting to the enactment of those regulations. Are you able to make a statement here at the hearing today on behalf of the alliance that it supports the enactment of standardized regulations by NHTSA that govern the use of electronic data recorder information?
I believe we're moving in that direction. I'll put it that way. I think the industry, there's well over 64%, I think is the most recent number, maybe it was 2005 models that have EDRs. We may have been confused on all the information. I think some of the early warning information, I think, is where we have some concerns. The type of information in the EDR is probably less of a concern. But again, I think there can be movement on this. And again, I think the stakeholders and working with NHTSA have an opportunity. My hesitation was because of my experience in the electronic field is that, again, some people have a very simplistic idea of what that is. So it's not quite as simple as just saying everyone's going to have a quote, a black box. But I think we're moving in that direction.
Well, and Ms. Gotti, I want to talk to you about that because in your written statement you said the EDR information must also be standardized and expanded. And Mr. Stearns began his question by asking Ms. Claybrook about the ownership of that data and assumed that it belonged to the owner of the vehicle. And yet during the early years of EDR data availability, the manufacturers frequently took the position that was proprietary information that belonged to them, not the person who paid for the automobile. So how do we move forward from this point to try to come up with a system that makes easily available and downloadable information that achieves the privacy concerns we're worried about, but provides us with better data that helps us solve the underlying problems that leads to occupant injury?
As we noted in a written testimony that the NHTSA regulation is going to require EDRs to collect the cars that do have EDRs to collect certain standardized amounts of data for 2013 model year cars. We'd like to see that happen sooner. We think there's a safety utility to the information that they collect. But there are some privacy concerns about ownership of the data, as you mentioned, Representative Braley. And in the past, Consumers Union has submitted comments to NHTSA as they were considering the regulation that the final rule that they put forward in 2006. And I would be happy to share that with your office.
Please do. That would be much appreciated. Okay. And Ms. Claybrook, I want to finish with you. One of the things that we know from the medical field is a process called differential diagnosis. And that's when a physician is presented with a sick patient. they come up with a hierarchy of the possible causes of their illness, beginning with the most likely and descending to the least likely. And then the physician goes through a process of testing and evaluation to try to rule out what could be causing the illness to be able to reach a final diagnosis and a plan of treatment. And one of the concerns I have with the response we've seen to some of the problems with the Toyota recall is that the differential diagnosis that Toyota engaged in was limited, it appeared to many of us, to a mechanical failure. And they have now participated in massive recalls to address sticky accelerator pedals and problems with floor mats. And yet we still see reports of sudden and unanticipated acceleration in vehicles where those retrofits have been made. So can you comment, based on your experience as a former NHTSA administrator and as somebody involved in a long period of public safety advocacy, on what you think needs to be done to get to the underlying cause?
Well, Toyota is the only company, the only entity that can do that. They designed the vehicle, they created the software, they have software engineers who did it. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration should not design the remedy. It never has, in any case ever. And it doesn't have the capacity to do the kind of evaluation that is necessary to figure out what the underlying cause is. A lot of people have said that figuring out a software glitch is almost impossible in some cases, particularly if no marker is left, that this glitch even occurred, a marker left in the computer. And so that's why a lot of people have talked about the brake override as the only possible solution, because we just don't, at least we don't know, maybe Toyota does, but we don't know what the problem is. I think it's very interesting that Toyota has said it's a floor mat recall of 5 million cars, and yet the remedy that they're putting in most of those cars is not only to remove or fix the pedal and the floor mat, but to put in a brake override system, which is an electronic fix. Why are they putting an electronic fix in if it's the floor mat or if it's the pedal? They say it's for customer good, so they'll feel safe. I think it's because it's a software problem. And if the vehicles have been fixed with the floor mat and the pedal and they still run away, then there's obviously another problem. And I think there are also vehicles that are not covered by the recall that may have these problems. They may not be identical. They may use a different software, so they're not identical problem. But there's no question in my mind that this is an electronic issue. And I think the company took the position early on that it wasn't, because that hurts their sales with consumers. Consumers don't like software glitches they can't understand, and they couldn't change. Now, if they change their mind, they're going to be subject to 18 U.S.C. 1001, lying to the government and going to jail. So they're in a very difficult position. Why would they do that now if they've taken this position in the hardcore way that they have? And I was at a Senate hearing the other day, and there were 21 people representing Toyota sitting in front of me. And I said to them, gee, you have a lot of lobbyists here. And they said, oh, no, these are all communications people. I think that they're looking at this as a communications fix as opposed to a real fix of this vehicle.
I want to thank all the witnesses for your impressive testimony and look forward to working with all of you as we move forward on these important issues. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.